There are words that don't just wound you, they erase you. They are spoken softly, under the polite applause of 100 people who have known you for decades, and they have the force of a wrecking ball. For Elizabeth Vance, that word was replaceable. The retirement party was held in the atrium of Blackwood Sons, a cathedral of glass and steel in Crestwood, Oregon, that felt more like a futuristic laboratory than an architectural firm. The year was 2025. Cold, recessed lighting gleamed off polished concrete floors. Champagne flutes tinkled, a sound too delicate for the cavernous space. Elizabeth stood near a potted ficus that looked as out of place as she felt, a tight, professional smile pinned to her face. 45 years. She had given this company 45 years of her life, her intellect, her soul. She had started as a brilliant young drafter with a mind full of impossible angles and ended as the firm's top administrator, a title that felt like a beautifully crafted cage. Her son, Mike, stood near the makeshift stage, talking to one of the junior partners. He was a senior project manager here now, his career path paved with the stones of his mother's sacrifices. He looked handsome in his tailored suit, but he wouldn't meet her eye. He had been avoiding it all night, offering a quick, "You look great, Mom," before being swept away into another conversation. She knew why. She was a relic he had to be seen honoring, a monument to a past he was desperate to outrun. Then, James Blackwood Jr., son of the founder, and now the sleek silver-haired CEO, tapped the microphone. The polite chatter died down. James had the easy charm of a man who had never been told no. His teeth were too white, his smile too practiced. "Friends, colleagues," he began, his voice echoing slightly in the sterile space. "Tonight, we gather to celebrate a transition, a turning of the page. Blackwood Sons has always been about looking forward, about progress, about embracing the future of design, of technology, of innovation." He gestured vaguely at the gleaming walls around them, as if they were a testament to his own genius and not the result of 100 underpaid designers working sleepless nights. Elizabeth felt a familiar, tired ache settle in her bones. She had heard this speech, in various forms, for years. "And to move into that future," James continued, his gaze finally settling on her, "we must also honor the past. We honor the foundations that were laid." He paused for effect. "Tonight, we honor Elizabeth Vance." A ripple of polite applause. Elizabeth inclined her head, the smile feeling brittle on her lips. 45 years, James said, shaking his head in mock wonder. An incredible tenure. "Elizabeth has been a fixture here, a constant. The organizational rock, as my father used to say. She kept the trains running on time, managed the schedules, ordered the supplies, all the essential vital work that allows the real visionaries to create." The words hung in the air, a subtle demotion disguised as a compliment. The real visionaries, not you, never you. Mike shifted his weight, his knuckles white as he gripped his champagne flute. He was looking at his expensive Italian shoes, a flush of color creeping up his neck. James wasn't finished. He leaned into the microphone, his voice dropping into a tone of patronizing sincerity. "We thank Elizabeth for her service. She has been a steady presence. But as we innovate, as we integrate our new AI design systems, as we streamline for the next century, we must also be honest. We must acknowledge that some roles, some functions, become easily replaceable." Silence. Not a respectful silence, but a shocked, dead one. And the air crackled with it. The clinking of glasses stopped. Every eye in the room was on her, waiting for her to crumble. The words weren't a careless slip. They were a public execution, a final, definitive statement on her worth. Easily replaceable. After 45 years of 80-hour weeks, of missed birthdays, of pouring her own uncredited genius into the margins of other men's blueprints, this was her epitaph. Mike's head sank lower. He looked like a boy caught cheating on a test. He said nothing. He did nothing. He just stood there, a silent accomplice to her humiliation. Elizabeth held his gaze for a fraction of a second. She saw the shame there, yes, but underneath it, she saw something else. Relief. Relief that the awkward duty was almost over. relief that he could now ascend without the shadow of his administrator mother holding him back. And in that moment, the mask she had worn for nearly half a century became perfect. It was a masterpiece of social engineering. Her smile didn't waver. Her posture remained impeccable. She took a slow, deliberate breath, held up her glass in a silent toast to James, and gave a small, graceful nod, as if he had just paid her the highest of compliments. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. Not here. Not ever. The drive home was a blur of streetlights smearing across the windshield. The sleek, silent electric car, a retirement gift from the firm, felt like a coffin on wheels. She left the sterile modernity of downtown Crestwood and drove towards the wooded hills, where the houses had character and the trees were older than the companies that sought to cut them down. She pulled into the driveway of the house she and Thomas had built. It wasn't a mansion. It was a modest, mid-century modern jewel box, a symphony of wood, glass, and stone nestled into the hillside. Every line, every angle was a memory. Thomas had been the named architect, the visionary, but she had been the one who solved the impossible geometry of the cantilevered roof. She had been the one who figured out how to frame the windows to catch the morning sun in winter and the dappled shade in summer. His name was on the plans. Her soul was in the walls. The click of the key in the lock was a familiar, comforting sound. Inside, the house was silent, but it wasn't an empty silence. It was a silence filled with the ghosts of a life well lived. The air smelled of old books, cedar, and the faint, lingering scent of Thomas's pipe tobacco, even though he'd been gone for a decade. She walked past the gallery of framed photos on the wall. There they were, she and Thomas in their 20s, beaming, standing on the empty plot of land that would become their home. They were so young, so full of a shared dream. There were Mike's school pictures, charting his journey from a gap-toothed first grader to a serious-faced high school graduate. In every photo she was there, a steady, smiling presence in the background. The supporter, the rock. For 45 years, that had been her story. She was the firm's top administrator. The organizational genius. She had a good eye, they'd said, for supporting the real architects. They praised her efficiency, her loyalty, her ability to anticipate needs. It was a subtle, insidious kind of praise, the kind that acknowledges your usefulness while denying your brilliance. It was the praise you gave a well-trained horse, not a partner. She ran a hand along the smooth, cool surface of the drafting table in Thomas's old study. It was her study now, but she'd never been able to call it that. It was still his space, filled with his tools, T-squares, compasses, old blueprints rolled into tight cylinders and stored in cardboard tubes. The silence of the room seemed to amplify James's words, making them echo off the walls. Easily replaceable. Was she? She had organized the firm's archives, a labyrinth of projects stretching back to the 1970s. She had negotiated with stubborn city planners. She had smoothed over the egos of brilliant but temperamental designers. She had caught fatal flaws in structural calculations that the visionaries had missed. She had poured coffee. She had ordered lunch. She had done whatever was needed because she believed in the work. She believed in the legacy. She sank into the worn leather of Thomas's armchair, the cool material a shock against her skin. The chair still held the faint imprint of his body. She closed her eyes. Was this it? Was this the sum of her life? A gold watch she would never wear, a humiliating speech, and a future of silent, empty days in a house full of memories. The grief she had held at bay all night, the raw, stinging hurt, finally began to seep through the cracks in her composure. A single, hot tear traced a path down her cheek, a quiet testament to a legacy publicly denied. She didn't wipe it away. She let it fall, a small, wet punctuation mark at the end of a very long chapter. The next morning, the sunlight that she had so carefully designed the house to capture streamed into the living room, painting stripes of gold across the hardwood floor. It felt like a mockery. Elizabeth was nursing a cup of black coffee, the bitter taste a welcome distraction, when the doorbell chimed. Its cheerful two-note sound was a violent intrusion into her fragile peace. She wasn't expecting anyone. Mike wouldn't come. He'd send a text in a day or two, full of hollow apologies and justifications. Through the frosted glass panel of the door, she saw two figures, one tall and broad, the other slim and animated. She opened the door. James Blackwood stood on her porch, a predatory smile plastered on his face. Beside him, his wife Camilla, a woman who had turned her life into a brand, was already holding up her phone, the screen glowing. "Elizabeth, good morning," James boomed, as if they were old friends dropping by for a chat. "Surprise," Camilla chirped, her voice an octave too high. She angled her phone to capture Elizabeth's bewildered face. "We are live, everyone. Just popping in to check on the absolute legend, Elizabeth Vance, on her first day of glorious retirement. Say hi to my followers, Elizabeth. Send some love, guys." Elizabeth stared, speechless. Camilla was live streaming this ambush to her thousands of Instagram followers. A charitable visit. Her private home, her private grief, was now content for a vapid social media feed. "James? Camilla? What are you doing here?" Elizabeth's voice was flat, devoid of the warmth she usually feigned. "Just wanted to see how you were settling in," James said, stepping past her into the foyer, his expensive cologne polluting the air. "And, well, we had a little idea we were too excited to wait to share." They didn't have a gift. They didn't have flowers or a bottle of wine. They had a real estate contract. James followed her into the living room, his eyes sweeping across the space, not with appreciation, but with the cold calculation of a developer assessing a property. Camilla trailed behind, her phone still held high, providing a running commentary for her online audience. "Oh wow, guys, look at this space. So much potential. A little dated, of course, but the bones are incredible. This is what authentic mid-century living looks like. #vintage vibes. #real estate goals." Elizabeth felt a cold dread begin to pool in her stomach. She stood by the fireplace, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, creating a physical barrier. "An idea?" "The best kind," James said, sitting uninvited on her sofa. He placed a thick sheaf of papers, bound in a crisp blue folder, onto her handcrafted walnut coffee table. The thud was obscene. "We've been talking about a firm expansion, a new RD campus, a place to really let Archimedes, our new AI, stretch its legs. And well, your property is contiguous with our back lot. It's perfect." Elizabeth stared at the folder. It was a formal offer, a contract. "You want to buy my house," she stated. It wasn't a question. "We want to offer you a fresh start," Camilla interjected, panning her phone from the contract to Elizabeth's face, hoping to capture a tearful, grateful reaction. "A chance to downsize, to simplify, less cleaning, more living." James opened the folder. "We've run the numbers. We know the historical landmark designation makes it tricky to sell on the open market. It complicates things, brings down the value. So we're prepared to offer you a very generous price, all things considered, to take this burden off your hands." He named a number. It was an insult. It was less than half of what the land alone was worth, even with the landmark status. It was the kind of offer you make to someone you believe is desperate, old, and stupid. Elizabeth's mind reeled. The party, the speech, the public branding of her as replaceable. It wasn't just a thoughtless cruelty. It was a strategy. It was the first step in a campaign to devalue her, to make her feel small and powerless, to soften her up for this. "And where," she asked, her voice dangerously quiet, "would I go?" "That's the best part," James beamed, leaning forward as if sharing a wonderful secret. "We can make the transition seamless. We have a premier suite waiting for you at the Blackwood Senior Living Facility. It's clean, it's secure, and the community is vibrant." The Blackwood Senior Living Facility. A grim concrete tower on the forgotten edge of town, overlooking a freeway. Elizabeth had driven past it 100 times. It was a place where you sent people you no longer wanted to see. It was a waiting room for death. It was not a suggestion. It was an eviction notice, a death sentence disguised as a favor. Camilla, oblivious to the monstrousness of the proposition, chimed in. 3 square meals a day, Elizabeth, and they have bingo on Tuesdays. Think of the friends you'll make. We could even do a sponsored post about your move-in day. Hashtag golden years. Hashtag new beginnings. Elizabeth looked from James's smug, expectant face to Camilla's vapid, smiling one. She looked at the contract lying on her coffee table, a vulture's offer to pick the meat from the bones of her life. They didn't just want her gone from the company. They wanted her home. They wanted to bulldoze the last physical evidence of her contribution, of her life with Thomas, of her very existence. And they wanted to pave over her memory and build a campus for the machine that had replaced her. They wanted to erase her completely. And in that pristine, sunlit moment, surrounded by the life she had built, something inside Elizabeth Vance shifted. The quiet, aching grief that had filled her since the party didn't just fade. It crystallized. It transformed. The heat of the hurt cooled and hardened into something diamond-sharp. The sadness became a still, silent, arctic rage. Her back straightened. The slight tremor in her hands ceased. The professional mask she had worn for decades, the one that had held firm through the public humiliation, finally fell away. But it wasn't tears or anger that replaced it. It was a profound, unnerving calm. A resolve so cold and so absolute it was terrifying. She looked at James, really looked at him, and for the first time, he seemed to see something in her eyes that made his smile falter. He saw that he hadn't come to visit a feeble old woman ready to be put out to pasture. He had come to the home of an architect, and he had just handed her the blueprints for his own destruction. The silence in the living room was a physical thing. It pressed in on them, thick and heavy, after the single word left Elizabeth's lips. No. It wasn't loud. It wasn't angry. It was a simple statement of fact, as solid and unmovable as the stone foundation of the house they were trying to take from her. James Blackwood's smile, a fixture of corporate portraiture and annual reports, faltered. It didn't vanish, but the corners twitched, the machinery behind it stuttering. His wife Camilla, seated beside him on the edge of the sofa like a bird of prey perched on a branch, let her mask of sympathetic concern slip. For a fraction of a second, her face was pure, unadulterated disbelief. I beg your pardon?" James managed, leaning forward slightly. "I think perhaps you misheard the offer, Elizabeth. It's quite generous, more than generous, considering the market." "I heard it perfectly, James," Elizabeth said. Her voice remained level. She held her teacup with a steady hand, a small island of calm in the storm of their ambition. "The answer is no." Camilla shifted, the silk of her dress whispering against the worn upholstery of Thomas's favorite armchair. "Elizabeth, dear," she began, her voice dripping with a condescending sweetness that set Elizabeth's teeth on edge. "We understand this is emotional for you. This house, all the memories. But you have to be practical. Think of the upkeep, the stairs. At your age." "My age," Elizabeth repeated, the words tasting like ash, "has afforded me a great deal of clarity. I am not selling my home." James cleared his throat, abandoning the pretense of friendliness. His tone hardened, became the one he used in boardrooms when a subordinate was questioning his authority. "Elizabeth, let's be frank. The firm is expanding. We need the space. This property is adjacent to our campus. It's a logical acquisition. We are prepared to make this very easy for you. The Blackwood Meadows facility is state-of-the-art. You'd be comfortable, cared for." Cared for. The words were a threat wrapped in a velvet glove. Put away. Managed. Forgotten. "I am comfortable here," Elizabeth said, her gaze sweeping over the room. The faint scent of lemon oil and old books. The worn spot on the rug where Thomas used to tap his foot. The sliver of afternoon sun catching the dust motes dancing in the air. This wasn't just property. It was the archive of her life. And I am cared for. By myself. The discussion is over. She stood up, a clear, final dismissal. The Blackwoods exchanged a look. It was fleeting, but Elizabeth saw it all. The shared frustration, the flicker of contempt, the silent agreement that they would have to move to another strategy. "Very well," James said, his voice tight with restrained anger. He stood, buttoning his jacket, a gesture of control. "If you change your mind, the offer stands. For now." The unspoken, but not for long, hung in the air between them. After they left, the house was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet. The peaceful solitude was gone, replaced by a charged silence, the kind that follows a declaration of war. Elizabeth walked to the window and watched their sleek black car pull away from the curb, a silent predator retreating into the urban jungle. She felt a tremor in her hands and set the teacup down before she dropped it. The resolve she'd shown them had been real, but it had taken every ounce of her strength. She sank into her armchair, the fabric cool against her skin, and felt the first wave of true, chilling loneliness wash over her. The phone rang an hour later. She knew who it would be before she saw the name on the screen. Mike. She let it ring 3 times, composing herself, then answered. Hello, Michael. Mom. His voice was strained, impatient. He didn't bother with pleasantries. I just got off the phone with James. Of course you did, she thought. The loyal soldier reporting to his general. He told me you refused the offer, Mike continued. What are you thinking? Elizabeth closed her eyes. I'm thinking that this is my home, Michael. It's a building, Mom. A building that's too big for you. It's a portfolio asset with diminishing returns. He was speaking the language of Blackwood Sons, a dialect of spreadsheets and bottom lines that had no vocabulary for love or memory. James is giving you a way out. A generous one. He's looking out for you. Is that what he told you? The coldness was creeping back into her voice, a glacier moving through her veins. He's not looking out for me, Mike. He's looking out for himself. He wants my land. So what if he does? It's good business. For God's sake, Mom, don't make this difficult. My entire career is tied up in that firm. My future. James is my boss, but he's a mentor. When you make things hard for him, you make them hard for me. And there it was. The raw, naked truth. The betrayal was so sharp, so precise, it felt like a physical incision. It cut deeper than James's public humiliation, deeper than Camilla's condescending pity. This was her son, her flesh and blood, and he was weighing her home, her life, against his next promotion. The scales had tipped, and she had been found wanting. I see, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Just call him back, Mike pleaded, his tone softening into a wheedling whine. Tell him you were emotional. Tell him you'll reconsider. Smooth it over. For me. For me. Not for us. For me. Elizabeth felt something inside her shift. A gear that had been rusted in place for 45 years, a gear of accommodation and quiet support and self-effacement, ground itself free with a screech of metal on metal. The sadness that had filled her home for weeks evaporated, burned away by a sudden white-hot flame of anger. It was an unfamiliar feeling. Pure, clean, powerful. No, she said, the word ablade this time. Mom, don't be stubborn. I have to go, Michael. Wait, don't you? She pressed the red icon on the screen, ending the call. The silence that rushed in to fill the void was no longer lonely. It was hers. It was the sound of a foundation being laid for something new. She stood in the center of her living room, her home, and understood. They didn't just want the house. They wanted to tear down everything she was, and she would not let them. The fight had come to her, and she would not back down. That night, she couldn't sleep. The anger simmered, a low fire in her gut. It wasn't the explosive, fleeting anger of a shouting match. It was a deep, slow-burning rage that demanded fuel. It drove her from her bed, down the stairs, and to a door she hadn't opened in years, the door to the basement. The air that rose to meet her was cool and smelled of damp earth, aging paper, and time itself. She flipped a switch, and a single bare bulb flickered to life, casting long, dancing shadows across a subterranean world of forgotten things. This was Thomas's domain, his archives, stacks of cardboard boxes labeled in his precise architectural script, rolled-up blueprints tied with faded string, standing in tall cylinders like ancient scrolls. She had always thought of this place as a testament to his genius. The golden era of Blackwood Sons, as James's father Arthur had called it. the era that had built the firm's reputation. An era, she now realized, that had coincided perfectly with the first 2 decades of her marriage. Her hand trembled as she reached for the first roll. The string crumbled in her fingers. She carried it to a large, dusty drafting table in the center of the room and carefully unrolled it. The paper was heavy, brittle at the edges. It was the foundational plan for the Old City Library, one of the firm's most celebrated projects from the early 80s. She remembered the nights Thomas had spent down here, the frantic energy, the endless cups of coffee she'd brought him. Her eyes scanned the detailed schematics, the innovative open-plan layout, the load-bearing columns disguised as aesthetic features, the clever use of natural light. Ideas she remembered sketching on a napkin at a diner one night, trying to help him break through a creative block. Just a helpful suggestion, she'd called it. You're the architect, darling. And then she saw it. In the bottom right corner, in the margin next to the main credit block, was a faint, almost invisible notation in pencil. A sequence of quick, conceptual sketches for the atrium's revolutionary truss system, and next to them 2 tiny, neat letters, EV. Her breath caught in her throat, her own initials. She stared at them, her heart pounding against her ribs. She'd forgotten she even did that, a habit from her university days, marking a thought before it flew away. She looked at the formal credit block, printed in stark black ink. Designed by Arthur Blackwood, Thomas Vance, A.B., T.V. Her name was nowhere, erased. A wave of dizziness swept over her. It was a coincidence. It had to be. One idea, a fragment she'd offered up, that he'd forgotten to credit. With a growing sense of dread, she moved to the next roll. The plans for the Crestwood Gallery. She unrolled it, the paper crackling in protest. She scanned the margins, her eyes hungry, fearful. And there it was again. A small, elegant solution for a curved, unsupported wall. An idea she'd had while gardening, inspired by the spiral of a snail's shell, and beside the sketch, almost lost in the grid lines, EV, the main credit block, designed by A.B., T.V. She moved faster now, a frantic archaeologist excavating her own buried life. Roll after roll, the Sterling Tower, the Metro Transit Hub, the award-winning Riverfront Pavilion. On dozens of them, on the most crucial, foundational designs that had defined the firm's aesthetic, she found her ghost, her faint pencil initials hidden in the margins like a secret shame, always beside the nascent, brilliant concept that formed the core of the project, the spark, the soul of the building, and on every single final blueprint, the credit was the same, A.B., T.V. She wasn't a supporter. She wasn't a helpful partner. She was the architect. She was the architect of the firm's golden era, and they had erased her, systematically, meticulously. They hadn't just stolen her work, they had stolen her history, her identity, and fed it to the legacies of 2 men, one her boss, the other her husband. She sank onto a dusty stool, the blueprint spread out before her like an accusation. The anger from her son's phone call was nothing compared to this. This was a violation that spanned decades. The walls of the basement, once a symbol of her husband's dedication, now felt like the walls of a tomb. Her tomb. And she had just clawed it open from the inside. The next morning, the first call she made was to Ava. Her granddaughter arrived within the hour, a whirlwind of youthful energy and concern. She took one look at Elizabeth's face, the exhaustion, the new, hard light in her eyes, and wrapped her in a hug. "Grandma, what is it? You sound different." "I am different," Elizabeth said, her voice raspy. She led Ava down to the basement, to the drafting table now covered in the evidence of her stolen life. "I need you to look at something. You're studying law. You're smart. I need you to tell me I'm not crazy." Ava, ever the pragmatist, surveyed the scene. Her eyes, sharp and intelligent, moved from blueprint to blueprint. Elizabeth pointed to the initials, then to the credit blocks. She didn't need to explain much. The pattern was damning. "EV," Ava said softly, tracing Elizabeth's initials with her finger. "And the final credit is just Arthur Blackwood and Grandpa Thomas." She looked up, her expression shifting from confusion to a cold, simmering fury that mirrored Elizabeth's own. "Oh my God, Grandma, how many of them are like this?" "I've found 17 so far," Elizabeth said, her voice flat. "I stopped counting." Ava pulled out her phone, her thumbs flying across the screen. Okay, deep breaths. This is monumental. It's theft. Intellectual property theft, on a massive scale. She started pacing the small, clear space in the basement. But it was decades ago. Statute of limitations could be an issue, and proving these initials are yours, and that they correspond to the final design. "They are mine," Elizabeth said, a note of iron in her voice. "I believe you," Ava said instantly. "I 100% believe you, but a court would need more. They'd say Grandpa Thomas was the employee, that anything created in this house for the firm belonged to them." Her mind was racing, connecting legal dots. What have they been doing lately? Blackwood Sons? Any big news? Any announcements? "I haven't paid attention," Elizabeth admitted. "Since the party, I've been trying to forget they exist. Let's see." Ava's fingers tapped again. She navigated to the Blackwood Sons corporate website, a slick, modern interface of polished steel and glass building facades. She scrolled through the news section. Lots of PR fluff, new contracts, here we go, press release from 2 months ago. She turned the phone around. The headline was bold and arrogant. "Blackwood Sons unveils Archimedes. The future of architecture is here." Elizabeth leaned in to read the text. "Blackwood Sons is proud to announce the launch of our revolutionary proprietary AI design engine, Archimedes," Ava read aloud. "Harnessing 5 decades of our firm's unparalleled design philosophy, Archimedes can generate flawless, award-winning, context-aware architectural plans in a matter of minutes. This technology marks the end of human error and the dawn of a new era in construction." Elizabeth felt a chill run down her spine. 5 decades, her entire career. Ava kept reading, her voice growing tighter with each word. "Archimedes is more than an algorithm. It is the living embodiment of the Blackwood legacy. It has been trained on our complete historical archives, ensuring that every line it draws is imbued with the genius that made our firm a global leader. Archimedes will carry the Blackwood legacy into the next century." Carry the Blackwood legacy. The phrase echoed in Elizabeth's memory. It was the same phrase James had used in his retirement speech for her, the one where he'd called her a loyal fixture, a piece of the office furniture. "My God," Elizabeth whispered. "The archives." Ava looked up from the phone, her eyes wide with a horrifying realization. "Grandma, these blueprints, your sketches, they must have digitized everything, the whole basement." The pieces clicked into place with sickening precision. They weren't just erasing her past. They were using it to fuel their future. They had taken her mind, her creativity, her very soul, and fed it into a machine. A machine they named Archimedes, a machine designed to replace her, to make her obsolete, built entirely from the foundations she had laid. She was the digital ghost in their machine, the slave chained to their new legacy. The anger was now mixed with a profound sense of violation. This was a new kind of theft, a high-tech desecration of her life's work. It felt personal, intimate, like they had reached into her mind and copied its contents. "There has to be more," Elizabeth said, her mind suddenly sharp, focused. "Thomas, he kept things, everything. There was a box, a small one he always kept locked." She led Ava upstairs to the study. In the bottom drawer of Thomas's old desk, behind a stack of tax returns, was a small, handsome wooden box with a brass lock. She had never known what was inside. He'd always said it was for private papers, a boundary she had respected for 45 years. No more. "I need to open this," she said. Ava looked at the box, then at her grandmother's determined face. She nodded once. "I'll get a screwdriver." Prying the lock felt like another desecration, but a necessary one. The wood splintered. The lock gave way with a sad little pop. Inside, nestled on a bed of velvet, was a single, leather-bound journal, his private journal. Elizabeth's hands shook as she lifted it out. She opened it to a random page. Thomas's familiar, precise handwriting filled the page. She flipped through the years, the entries mostly mundane, project notes, frustrations with contractors, thoughts on the weather. Then she saw the tabbed page, a single bookmark. The date at the top read, October 12, 1978. She sat down heavily in the desk chair and began to read. Arthur called me into his office today. He had one of Elizabeth's sketches, the one for the Miller Building atrium, the one she drew on a placemat last week. My placemat. I must have left it in my notebook. He laid it on his desk and looked at me. He didn't look angry. He looked hungry. "She's good," he said. "Too good. Where did she come up with this?" I told him the truth. I said she just has a knack for seeing things, that she helps me sometimes. Arthur laughed. He said, "Son, she's not helping you. She's out-designing you. She's out-designing me." Then his face got serious. He told me we had a problem. He said the world of architecture isn't ready for a woman like her, that clients wouldn't trust it, that our reputation is built on the names Blackwood and Vance. Two strong male names. He said her talent, if it got out, would make us both look weak. Parasites. He made me an offer, a conspiracy. He said from now on, any of her helpful suggestions become mine, our ideas. We absorb them. We present them as our own genius. In return, he ensures my partnership, our financial security, our place in this city. He said if I refused, he would make one phone call and we'd both be blacklisted. We'd be ruined. He'd make sure I never laid a single brick in this town again. He'd call her an ambitious meddler and me a fool who couldn't control his wife. I looked at him. I saw my whole future hanging in the balance. Our future. I thought about Elizabeth. She doesn't want the spotlight. She loves supporting me. She's happy being the woman behind the man. It wouldn't even be a lie. It would just be an arrangement. A way to protect her. To protect us. To give her ideas the vessel they need to become real. I agreed. I shook his hand, and I felt a weight settle on my soul. Tonight, I will go home and praise her for her helpfulness. I will tell her what a wonderful partner she is, and the lie will begin. Elizabeth let the journal fall from her hands. It hit the carpet with a soft, final thud. The air left her lungs. 45 years. 45 years of praise. 45 years of being called a wonderful partner, a supportive wife. 45 years of gaslighting. He wasn't a weak man forced into a corner. He was a willing accomplice. He had built their entire life, their entire marriage, on this single, monstrous lie. The foundation of Blackwood Sons wasn't just built on her stolen mind. It was built on her husband's betrayal, cemented by his calculated deception. The pain was so immense, so total, it went beyond tears. It was a silent, hollow scream in the center of her being. Ava knelt beside her, picking up the journal. She read the page, her face paling. She put a hand on Elizabeth's arm. "Grandma." Elizabeth looked up, and Ava saw something in her eyes that scared her. The last remnants of the soft, retired woman were gone. In her place was something forged in the fire of absolute betrayal, something hard, sharp, and unbreakable. "Get your coat," Elizabeth said, her voice a dead calm. "We're going to see a lawyer." The lawyer's office was on the 30th floor of a downtown skyscraper, a world of chrome, glass, and hushed, expensive silence. It was designed to make you feel small, insignificant. A week ago, it would have worked on Elizabeth. Today, she felt none of it. Their lawyer, a man named David Chen, whom Ava had found through her university's legal aid clinic recommendations, was sharp, empathetic, and wore a perfectly tailored suit. He listened patiently for over an hour. He examined the blueprints. He read the journal entry. He looked at the press release for Archimedes. He steepled his fingers, his expression grim. "Emotionally," he began, his voice gentle but firm, "you have one of the most compelling cases I have ever seen, Mrs. Vance." Elizabeth felt a flicker of hope. "Legally," He continued, and the flicker died. You have almost nothing. Ava bristled. What are you talking about? We have evidence. The initials, the journal? The initials are circumstantial, Chen explained, turning to Ava. They'd argue it was a shorthand for anything. The journal is powerful, yes, but it's hearsay. It's the word of a deceased man. Their lawyers would tear it apart. They'd claim he was delusional, exaggerating, a disgruntled employee writing fiction, and since both he and Arthur Blackwood are gone, there's no one to cross-examine. He turned back to Elizabeth. The biggest hurdles are time and paper. The statute of limitations on intellectual property theft for most of these designs ran out decades ago. But the real fortress is the employment contract your husband signed. I can guarantee you it contains language that states any and all work, ideas, or concepts created by him or anyone in his household assisting him are the sole property of Blackwood Sons. They own it all, lock, stock, and barrel. He slid a box of tissues across the polished mahogany table toward Elizabeth. She ignored it. And the NDAs Thomas signed, Chen went on. The non-disclosure agreements would have been ironclad. He legally could not attribute the work to anyone else, even if he wanted to. You were, in the eyes of the law, not an independent creator. You were an uncredited, unpaid, and legally invisible extension of their employee. Each word was a nail in the coffin of a conventional fight, a legal wall, built brick by brick with contracts and clauses and loopholes, designed by the powerful for the express purpose of protecting the powerful. So what you're saying, Elizabeth said, her voice devoid of emotion, is that they saw this coming, they planned for it. They built a legal fortress around my mind, and I never even knew I was a prisoner. That's a very accurate way of putting it, Chen said quietly. He leaned forward, his expression full of genuine sympathy. Mrs. Vance, I could take your money. I could file a lawsuit and generate headlines. We could make a lot of noise. But their legal team would bury us in motions. They would drain your finances and drag your name, your husband's name, through the mud. And in the end, we would lose. I'm truly sorry. Elizabeth stood up. Ava looked at her, expecting to see defeat, despair, but she saw neither. She saw that same terrifying calm from the study, now cooled into something that looked like purpose. Thank you for your time, Mr. Chen, Elizabeth said, extending a hand. You have been very illuminating. He shook her hand, a puzzled look on his face. As they rode the elevator down in silence, Ava finally broke. So that's it. They just win. They take your house, they take your life's work, they turn you into a damn computer program, and there's nothing we can do? The elevator doors opened to the bustling lobby. Elizabeth walked out into the stream of people, a ghost moving through a world she had helped to build. She stopped and looked up at the towering skyscrapers outside, canyons of steel and glass, structures of logic, rules, and immense, crushing weight. The lawyer said we have nothing, Elizabeth said, her voice soft but clear over the city noise. He said we can't fight them legally. She turned to her granddaughter, a faint, cold smile touching her lips. He didn't say we couldn't fight them at all. The legal path was a dead end, a stone wall. Ava had slumped in her chair after the call with the lawyer, defeated. The statute of limitations, the non-disclosure agreements, the sheer financial power of Blackwood Sons. It was a fortress they couldn't breach. But Elizabeth wasn't looking at the fortress anymore. She was looking at her granddaughter, whose face was a mask of furious injustice. The fight wasn't over. It had just changed. For days, the house was quiet, filled only with the hum of a laptop and the soft scratch of Elizabeth's pen on a notepad. Ava, refusing to accept defeat, had redirected her energy. She wasn't looking for legal loopholes anymore. She was looking for pressure points. She haunted the digital edges of Blackwood Sons, scrolling through press releases, shareholder reports, and a dozen glowing articles about their new proprietary AI, Archimedes, the future of architecture. The legacy of Blackwood evolved. It was a throwaway line in a tech blog interview with the AI's lead programmer that gave her the first thread. The programmer, puffed up with pride, mentioned an open developer log. It wasn't for the public, not really, but it was publicly accessible. a place for the team to post updates, share snippets of code, and track progress. It was a monument to their own brilliance. It was arrogance, and arrogance, Ava knew, was a security flaw. She found it in under an hour. A simple web address, no password required, just a long, scrolling page of technical jargon, timestamps, and progress reports. It looked like nonsense, but to Ava, it was a language. She called Elizabeth over to the dining room table, where the laptop screen glowed in the evening dim. "Grandma, look at this. It's the development history for Archimedes." Elizabeth leaned in, her eyes tracing the lines of code. It meant nothing to her. "What am I looking at, dear?" "It's a diary of how they built it, how they taught it." Ava's voice was tight, her fingers scrolling faster and faster. "They talk about the training data sets. That's the information they fed the AI to teach it how to design buildings. They needed a massive, high-quality, consistent source." A cold knot formed in Elizabeth's stomach. She knew what a consistent source she had been for 45 years. "Where did they get it?" Elizabeth asked, her voice barely a whisper. "That's what I'm trying to find. They label the datasets with project codes. BWS Archive Prime, BWS Legacy Core." Ava's scrolling stopped. Her finger hovered over the screen. "Wait. What's this?" It was a link, deep in a log entry from over a year ago. The note attached was simple: initializing ingestion of EV, primary collection, high-resolution scans, full archive. EV. Elizabeth felt the air leave her lungs. "EV?" she breathed. "Elizabeth Vance." "Oh my God," Ava whispered. She clicked the link. It led to a cloud storage directory, also unsecured. A file list stretched for pages, thousands upon thousands of files. Scan 1978 Sketchbook 04 page 17 TIFF. Scan 1985 Blueprint Notes A Series TIFF. Scan 1992 Napkin Concept Cafe Diemt TIFF. Scan 2011 Structural Analysis Notes.tiff. Ava clicked on one at random. An image loaded. It was a page from one of her old notebooks, a frantic, coffee-stained sketch of a spiraling staircase, with her own handwriting scrawled in the margins. Elizabeth remembered drawing it. It was for a library that was never built. She could almost smell the coffee, feel the worn leather of the old office chair. Ava clicked another and another. A torrent of her life's work flooded the screen. Every doodle, every blueprint, every marginal note, every half-formed idea, every private thought she'd ever committed to paper in that office. The entire contents of the archives she had so meticulously maintained for 4.5 decades. They had digitized it all. It wasn't just inspiration. It wasn't a tribute. They had taken her entire creative essence, and fed her into a machine. They had scanned her soul and turned it into source code. The AI wasn't an evolution of the Blackwood legacy. It was Elizabeth Vance, a digital ghost chained to a server, forced to create for them forever. The violation was so profound, so complete, it transcended theft. It was a kind of technological cannibalism. She wasn't just replaced, she was consumed. Ava looked at her grandmother, whose face was pale, her expression unreadable. She looked like a statue carved from ice. The hurt, the sadness, it was all gone, replaced by something cold, hard, and terrifyingly clear. "Grandma?" Ava asked, her own voice trembling with a mixture of rage and fear. Elizabeth didn't answer. She just stared at the screen, at the ghost of herself, and for the first time in months, she felt a strange, chilling sense of power. They had given her the truth. Now, she was going to give them the consequences. The law was a cage designed to protect men like James Blackwood. Elizabeth knew that now. A system of rules meant to exhaust and bankrupt people like her. So she would not play by their rules. She would use her own. For 2 days, she sat in her study, the room where Thomas's old drafting table still stood like a monument to a complex past. She thought about her 45 years at the firm, about the systems she knew, the protocols she had followed, the digital architecture that ran in parallel to the physical kind. On the third night, a thought sparked in her mind. A simple, almost laughable one. They had taken her name off the door, scrubbed her from the website, and erased her from their history. But in 45 years, in an office full of administrative turnover, had anyone ever remembered to deactivate her employee credentials? Her password, her key to the kingdom she had helped build. Her fingers trembled slightly as she opened her old, personal laptop. It was slow, outdated, but it worked. She navigated to the firm's remote access portal. A simple login screen appeared. Blackwood Sons, username, E. Vance. She typed it in. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Now the password. It had been the same for the last 20 years. A combination of her husband's initials and the year they had finished building this very house. TV 1975. She typed it, her eyes closed, and pressed enter. For a moment, nothing. Then, the screen flickered. A welcome message appeared. "Welcome, Elizabeth Vance." She was in. A quiet, triumphant laugh escaped her lips. It was the sound of a key turning in a lock. The fools, the arrogant, careless fools. They had cast her out, but left the door wide open. She moved the mouse with a newfound precision. The server directory was as familiar to her as the layout of her own home. She bypassed the public-facing folders, the HR documents, the marketing materials. She went deep into the active project files, the heart of the company's current operations. There it was, the flagship, the project that was all over the architectural news feeds. The Helios Tower, a Goliath of glass and steel commissioned by a tech billionaire, a new landmark for the Seattle skyline. The budget was astronomical. The prestige was career-defining. She clicked on the project folder. Her breath caught in her throat. Lead architect, Michael Vance. Her son. Of course. This was his reward, his prize for his loyalty, for his silence. He was managing the construction, the client, the teams on the ground, but he wasn't designing it. She scrolled down to the design lead. It wasn't a person. It was a designation. Designer, Archimedes AI. Her son was putting his name on a building designed by the ghost of his own mother. The irony was so bitter it tasted like acid. She opened the primary project file. Blueprints, renderings, structural calculations, material specifications, all generated by the AI, all flawless, all efficient, and all, in some fundamental way, hers. She saw her own design language everywhere, the sweep of a curtain wall, the specific angle of a supporting beam, the flow of public space. It was like looking at a collage of her own greatest hits, remixed by a machine that had no understanding of their origin. Then she saw the date. The project's official unveiling, a massive media event, was to be live-streamed to the world. It was in less than 48 hours. Mike would be on stage. James Blackwood would be on stage. They would be celebrating their triumph, a triumph built on her stolen life. A cold, clear purpose settled over her. This wasn't about credit anymore. This wasn't about money or revenge. A chill crept down her spine, a flicker of a memory from long ago, a warning she had given herself. She had to be sure. The feeling was a ghost haunting the edges of her mind, a cold dread that had nothing to do with stolen credit and everything to do with the immutable laws of physics. She pushed away from the server files and walked to the basement. The air was cool and smelled of old paper and dust. This was her private archive, the work she had brought home over the years. Not the official company files, but her own theoretical exercises, her thought experiments. She pulled out a heavy portfolio, its cardboard soft with age. The label, in her own fading script, read, Structural Integrity Studies, Cantilever Theory, 1991-1993. She untied the ribbon and carefully spread the large sketches across the floor. And there it was, a series of drawings from a lifetime ago. It had been a purely academic exercise, a way to test the limits of design. She had been fascinated by the concept of resonance, how a tiny, rhythmic vibration could bring down a massive structure. The Tacoma Narrows Bridge was the classic example. But she had taken it further. She had designed on paper a perfect flaw. It was a specific configuration for a large, cantilevered section of a building. A design that was, on the surface, elegant, strong, and materially efficient. It would pass all standard stress tests, but it had a hidden vulnerability, a fatal resonance point. It would fail, catastrophically, only under a very specific and rare combination of conditions. Sustained high heat, the kind you'd get from the afternoon sun blazing on a glass facade, combined with a low-frequency seismic vibration, the kind that might not even be felt by a human being. The heat would cause a microscopic expansion in the steel supports, changing their resonant frequency just enough. The vibration would then act like a tuning fork, building and building on itself until the structure tore itself apart. It wasn't a design, it was a warning, a demonstration of what not to do. A lesson on the hubris of relying on numbers alone, without the context of real-world, unpredictable chaos. Her note in the margin was clear. Conclusion: a theoretically elegant but practically fatal design. The margin for error is 0. Avoid at all costs. The AI had her data. It had this very sketch, scanned in high resolution. It had her conclusion. But it was a machine. It processed information. It didn't possess wisdom. It wouldn't understand a warning. It would see a design that was 99.9% efficient and viable. It would see the note not as a prohibition, but as just another piece of data attached to a successful-looking model. It wouldn't understand the human context, the nuance, the terror. "Ava," she called, her voice tight and strained. "I need you. Now." Ava ran down the stairs, her face etched with concern. "What is it? What did you find?" Elizabeth didn't speak. She just pointed a trembling finger at the sketch, then looked at her granddaughter, her eyes wide with horror. "The Helios Tower," Elizabeth whispered. "Get the blueprints from the server. Run a simulation. I need to know." The next hour was a frantic blur of motion. Ava's fingers flew across the keyboard, downloading the massive blueprint files for the Helios Tower. She pulled up the structural engineering software she used for her law school case studies, a powerful program designed to model physical stresses on buildings. "Okay, Grandma, talk to me. What are the parameters?" Ava said, her voice all business, masking the fear that was rising in her own throat. "The flaw is in the main western cantilever, the grand observation deck," Elizabeth said, her mind racing back 30 years. "The simulation needs 2 inputs. First, thermal load. Simulate a peak sun scenario. August afternoon in Seattle. Let's say a surface temperature on the steel of 120 degrees Fahrenheit." Ava's fingers clicked, inputting the data. "Okay, thermal load set. What's the second?" "Vibration, low frequency, very low, between 1 and 2 hertz. That's barely anything," Ava said, frowning. "The city code requires buildings to withstand a major earthquake." "This isn't a major earthquake," Elizabeth said grimly. "This is a whisper, a steady, rhythmic pulse, the kind you might get from deep underground or from heavy industrial equipment miles away, something no one would ever notice." Ava set the seismic frequency. Her hand hesitated over the enter key. She looked at her grandmother. "Are you sure?" Elizabeth just nodded, her jaw tight. "Run it." Ava hit enter. The screen filled with a wireframe model of the Helios Tower, glowing green. For a moment, nothing happened. The digital tower stood proud and strong. The simulation clock ticked forward. 10 minutes, 20, 30. The western facade of the wireframe began to glow yellow, then orange, indicating the rising heat. "Thermal load is approaching peak," Ava narrated, her eyes glued to the screen. "Structural integrity is at 99.7%. Everything's stable." Then the vibration started, a low, invisible pulse in the simulation. On the screen, a tiny graph measuring resonance began to tick upward. "Slowly at first, then faster. There's a slight harmonic vibration in the cantilever," Ava said, her voice dropping. It's amplifying." The green wireframe of the observation deck began to flicker. A few lines turned yellow. "Stress points are forming at the primary joints," Ava whispered. The resonance graph spiked sharply. "Oh God," Ava breathed. The lines on the screen turned from yellow to a sudden, violent red. With a speed that was terrifying, a digital crack appeared at the base of the cantilever. It spread like lightning across the structure. The wireframe model of the massive observation deck, a section of the building designed to hold hundreds of people, groaned for a fraction of a second in the simulation's physics engine, and then it simply detached. It peeled away from the main tower and plunged downwards in silent digital devastation, taking a huge chunk of the building's side with it. The rest of the tower, its core integrity now fatally compromised, began to twist. The simulation showed a catastrophic, progressive collapse. The multi-billion-dollar Helios Tower, the pride of Seattle's new skyline, was a death trap. A tomb waiting to be filled. Elizabeth sank into a nearby chair, the last of her strength gone. She felt nothing. Not anger, not triumph, just a vast, cold emptiness. They hadn't just stolen her past, they had weaponized it. And her own son was about to stand on a stage and present it to the world as his masterpiece. The night before the unveiling was thick and still. The air in Elizabeth's living room was heavy, with a silence that felt louder than any argument. James Blackwood sat stiffly in an armchair, his expensive suit looking out of place against the worn fabric. His wife, Camila, sat beside him, her arms crossed, radiating impatience and hostility. Mike stood by the fireplace, unable to look at his mother, his face pale and drawn. He just stared at the floor, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. They had come because Elizabeth had summoned them. Her message had been brief, cryptic, and carried a tone that allowed for no refusal. "My house, 9 p.m. It concerns the Helios Tower." James had broken the silence first, his voice dripping with condescending authority. "Elizabeth, if this is about some last-ditch attempt to claim credit or squeeze money out of us, I promise you, it's a pathetic waste of time. The launch is tomorrow. Nothing is going to stop it." Elizabeth didn't look at him. She didn't raise her voice. She simply picked up a tablet from the coffee table. Her hand was perfectly steady. She wasn't the grieving widow or the discarded employee anymore. She was something else, someone they had never met. "This isn't about credit, James," she said, her voice level and cold. "And it isn't about the past." She placed the tablet on the table in front of them, facing them. She pressed play. The screen lit up with the wireframe model of the Helios Tower. At first, James smirked, assuming it was some fan rendering. Mike flinched, as if seeing the building was a physical blow. The simulation began. They watched the thermal load increase, the orange glow spreading across the western facade. They saw the almost imperceptible vibration start. Camila leaned forward slightly, a flicker of curiosity in her eyes. Then they saw the resonance graph spike. They saw the lines of the cantilevered deck flash from green to a terrifying red. They watched, in stunned silence, as the observation deck tore away from the building. They watched the whole multi-billion-dollar structure catastrophically fail, collapsing into a digital heap of dust and debris. The simulation ended, leaving the image of the wreckage burning on the screen in the dark room. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a tomb. James Blackwood's face, usually flush with arrogant confidence, was a waxy, bloodless white. Camila's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. Mike looked like he was going to be physically sick. He swayed on his feet, one hand bracing himself against the mantelpiece. Elizabeth let the image hang in the air for a long moment before she spoke. Her voice cut through the stillness like a shard of glass. "The AI learned from me," she said, her eyes meeting James's, then moving to her son's. "It learned all my ideas, my efficiencies, my innovations." She paused, letting the weight of her next words settle. "Including my warnings. But it's a machine, you see. It doesn't know the difference." James stared at her, his mouth opening and closing silently, no sound coming out. The architect, the titan of industry, was gone. In his place was a man staring into an abyss of lawsuits, ruin, and manslaughter charges. Mike finally looked up at his mother. His eyes were filled with a desperate, horrifying understanding. It wasn't just his career that was about to end. He saw the faces of the construction workers still on site, the dignitaries scheduled for the pre-launch tour, the hundreds of people who would have been on that deck. He had been so proud to be the lead on a project that was, in reality, a time bomb, a bomb his own mother had designed, and that he had been too blind, too eager, too weak to see. The House of Memories had become a courtroom, and Elizabeth Vance was the judge. The simulation ended. The ghost of the Helios Tower, a phantom of steel and glass, hung in the air for a moment before dissolving back into the quiet hum of the laptop. For a full 10 seconds, the only sound in the living room was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, each tick a hammer blow against the silence. James's face was a storm cloud of purple and red. His knuckles were white where he gripped the arms of his chair. He was the first to break. "Sabotage!" he hissed, the word a venomous dart. He shot to his feet, the chair scraping violently against the hardwood floor. This is a fabrication. A deep fake. You bitter old woman, you couldn't stand to see us succeed without you, so you cooked this up." He pointed a trembling finger at the laptop, then at Elizabeth. "This is libel. It's corporate espionage." Elizabeth didn't flinch. She simply looked at him, her expression unreadable, her posture as serene as a statue. She had weathered his father's quiet manipulations for 45 years. James's blustering rage was like a child's tantrum in comparison. "The data doesn't lie, James," she said, her voice calm and level. It cut through his fury like a surgeon's scalpel. "The simulation was run using your own proprietary software, your own parameters. And the core of the problem, the fatal design element, it came directly from Archimedes." Mike hadn't moved. He was staring at the blank screen, his face the color of ash. His mouth was slightly open, his breathing shallow. He was the project lead. He saw the faces. The office workers on the 80th floor, the families in the observation deck cafe, the cleaning crews in the early morning, thousands of them, flashing through his mind in a horrifying slideshow of his own failure. He finally looked up, not at James, but at his mother. The accusation in his eyes wasn't for her. It was for himself. "How?" he whispered, his voice cracking. How could it use that design? It was a theoretical model, a warning." "Exactly," Elizabeth said, her gaze shifting to her son, a flicker of something clinical in her eyes, like a doctor diagnosing a disease she had long known about. "It was a warning. A perfect flaw I conceptualized decades ago to teach a principle that the most elegant solution can also be the most catastrophic if you don't understand the context. I wrote about it. I sketched it. I filed it away. Your AI, James, the one you built to replace me, it devoured my entire life's work. Every note, every sketch, every calculation. But it has no soul. It has no wisdom. It cannot differentiate between a blueprint and a cautionary tale. It saw an elegant solution to a complex stress problem, and it implemented it. It learned my warnings, Michael, but it couldn't understand them." Camilla, who had been watching the exchange with the cold focus of a predator, finally spoke. Her voice was ice. "What is the point of this, Elizabeth? A dramatic little show. To scare us?" "To inform you," Elizabeth corrected her, her voice dropping slightly, gaining weight. "Before you cut the ribbon on 1,000 coffins." James scoffed, trying to regain his footing. "We'll run our own simulations. We'll have our engineers, our real engineers, review the data. This is a pathetic last-ditch attempt to ruin me, to ruin the family name." "Your engineers are working from the same flawed data set," Elizabeth said patiently, as if explaining a simple concept to a difficult child. "They'll be looking for errors in their own calculations, not for a fundamental intentional flaw embedded by the very system they trust. By the time they found it, if they ever did, the first tenants would be moving in." She leaned forward slightly, the first hint of steel entering her voice. "You don't have time for that, and I won't allow it." She folded her hands on the table in front of her. The quiet gesture seemed to suck all the remaining oxygen out of the room. "So I'm going to offer you a choice," she said. The theatrics were over. This was the verdict. You have two options. You can think of them as Plan A and Plan B. She paused, letting the words hang in the air. Mike finally tore his eyes from the screen and looked at her, his expression one of pure, unadulterated dread. Option A, Elizabeth continued, her voice precise and devoid of emotion. Within the next hour, you will issue a public statement. You will announce the indefinite cancellation of the Helios Tower launch. The reason you will cite is the discovery of critical structural flaws found during a final review by a former senior consultant. She looked directly at James. You will not use my name, but the metadata will lead back to me when the time comes. That same day, you, Camilla, and Michael will sign over your controlling interest in Blackwood Sons. All of it. It will be placed into an independent, court-appointed trust. The firm, its name, and its legacy will be dismantled, systematically and quietly. James's jaw worked, but no sound came out. He looked like he'd been struck by lightning. Or, Elizabeth said, her voice becoming even colder, there is option B. She gestured to the laptop. On this computer is a single encrypted file. It contains the full simulation you just witnessed. It contains high-resolution scans of my husband's journals, detailing the initial theft of my work by your father. It contains the development logs Ava retrieved from your servers, proving Archimedes was trained exclusively on my intellectual property. And it contains the AI's source code with a clear line of logic showing exactly how and why it selected the fatal flaw for the Helios Tower. She let that sink in. The weight of it was suffocating. If you do not agree to option A, she said, her voice a flat, hard line, I will press a single button. That file will be simultaneously delivered to the primary tech client for the Helios Tower, to the national news desk of the New York Times, to Wired magazine, and to the head of the National Transportation Safety Board. This isn't blackmail, James. It isn't a negotiation. Her eyes locked onto his. It's a public safety announcement. I am simply giving you the courtesy of making it yourselves, a courtesy you never extended to me. She stood up, her movements fluid and unhurried. The power in the room had shifted so completely it was a physical force. She was no longer the discarded relic. She was the architect of their demolition. Your legacy, she said, looking from James's apoplectic face to Mike's shattered one, or what little freedom you have left. You have 1 hour to decide. She turned and walked out of the living room, leaving the three of them in the ruins of their future. The grandfather clock in the hall struck the hour, its chime echoing in the profound, devastating silence. The waiting was the strangest part. For 45 minutes, Elizabeth sat in her kitchen, nursing a cup of tea she didn't taste. Ava sat across from her, her own laptop open, a newsfeed aggregator scrolling silently on the screen. She hadn't said a word since Elizabeth returned from the living room. There was nothing to say. The bomb had been planted. Now they were just waiting to see if it would be disarmed or detonated. Elizabeth stared out the window at the garden, at the roses Thomas had planted. For a moment, a wave of profound weariness washed over her. The fight, the discovery, the confrontation. It had all been a blur of adrenaline and cold fury. Now, in the quiet, the sheer weight of it all settled on her. She had just irrevocably broken her own son. She had just single-handedly destroyed the company that had been the entire container for her adult life. It wasn't a victory that felt triumphant. It felt necessary, as essential and as painful as setting a broken bone. Ava's sharp intake of breath broke the stillness. Elizabeth turned. Ava's eyes were wide, fixed on her screen. She simply turned the laptop around. On the screen was a Twitter feed. A verified journalist from a major tech outlet had just posted. Breaking. Sources inside Blackwood Sons confirm Helios Tower launch has been indefinitely suspended. Internal memo cites critical structural flaws discovered in final review. Press release expected shortly. Story developing. It was real. They had folded. Within minutes, the internet ignited. The official press release dropped, a masterpiece of sterile corporate language that said everything by saying almost nothing. It mentioned a legacy consultant and an abundance of caution. But the words critical structural flaws were a death sentence. Hashtag Helios Tower and hashtag Blackwood collapse began trending worldwide. Tech blogs, architectural forums, and mainstream news sites scrambled to piece the story together. The client's stock nosedived in after hours trading. The name Blackwood, once a symbol of innovation and power, became synonymous with scandal and gross negligence. Elizabeth watched the digital fallout with a strange sense of detachment. It was like watching a controlled demolition from a safe distance. The building was collapsing exactly as she had designed it to. The days that followed were a cascade of consequences. The trust was established. Lawyers moved in. An army of accountants began the grim work of picking apart the firm's assets. The NTSB launched a full-scale investigation, their press conference confirming that an anonymous tip had averted a potential disaster of unprecedented scale. They didn't name her, but those who needed to know knew. The firm imploded with shocking speed. Partners resigned. Clients terminated their contracts en masse. The gleaming Blackwood Suns, building in the heart of the city, went on the market, its logo a mark of shame. And then came the hearings. Mike was the star witness. Elizabeth watched a clip on the evening news. She saw her son, a ghost of the man he was, walking out of a federal building, surrounded by a swarm of reporters shouting questions. His face was gaunt, his eyes hollow. He wore the expression of a man who had stared into the abyss and seen his own reflection. His testimony, leaked to the press, was devastating. He was forced to admit, under oath, that he had overseen the project, that he had trusted the AI implicitly, that he had ignored the concerns of his own team, that he had been negligent. His career wasn't just over. It was annihilated. He was disgraced, a cautionary tale whispered in boardrooms and classrooms. A week later, his car pulled up outside her house. Elizabeth watched from the kitchen window as he got out. He stood on the curb for a long time, just looking at the house, the home he had tried to take from her. He looked smaller, diminished, the expensive suit hanging off his frame. Finally, he walked up the path and knocked softly on the door. She opened it. They stood in silence for a moment, the space between them filled with the wreckage of their lives. "Mom," he began, his voice raspy. He looked down at his hands, then back up at her. Can I come in?" She stepped aside. He walked into the foyer and stood there, awkwardly, a stranger in his own childhood home. She led him into the living room, the same room where she had shattered his world. He wouldn't sit down. He just stood in the middle of the rug, turning in a slow circle, as if seeing it all for the first time. "I remember when Dad and you built this place," he said, his voice quiet. "I was 7. I thought you were magicians." "Your father was the magician," Elizabeth said, her voice neutral. "I was the assistant." He flinched, the words landing like a physical blow. He finally turned to face her, and she saw tears welling in his eyes. They weren't the crocodile tears of a man caught in a lie. They were the desolate tears of a man who had lost everything, including himself. "I read the journals," he choked out. "The ones you sent to the trust's lawyers, all of them. What Grandpa Arthur did to you. What Dad did. All those years. He took your work. He took your life. And I just worshipped him. I spent my whole life trying to be him." He was sobbing now, quiet, racking sobs that shook his entire body. "I'm sorry, Mom. I am so, so sorry. For everything. For not believing you. For asking you to leave this house. For being so blind. For what I almost let happen." Elizabeth listened. She felt a phantom ache in her chest, the ghost of a mother's instinct to comfort her child. But the child was a 40-year-old man, and the chasm between them had been dug over decades, not days. It was a canyon of lies, manipulations, and choices. His choices. She walked to the small bar cart in the corner and poured a glass of water, her movements steady. She handed it to him. He took it, his hand shaking so badly that water sloshed onto the floor. "He came to me when he was named project lead," she said, her voice soft but firm. It was a statement, not an accusation. He was so proud. He stood right there. She pointed to a spot by the fireplace. He told me he was finally going to build something that would make his father's legacy immortal. Mike crumpled, sinking into the armchair James had vacated. He put his head in his hands. "I was a fool," he whispered into his palms. "I was so arrogant." He looked up at her, his face a mask of desperation. Can you ever forgive me?" Elizabeth looked at her son, the man who was a stranger to her, forged in the image of the men who had erased her. She saw the little boy who thought she was a magician, and she saw the executive who had advised her to move into a retirement home to make way for a parking lot. The two images could no longer coexist. The pain was no longer a fresh wound. It was a scar, thick and permanent. It didn't hurt to the touch, but it had changed the landscape of her heart forever. "Forgiveness isn't mine to give, Michael," she said, and her voice was not cruel, but it was not kind either. It was simply the sound of the truth, unvarnished and absolute. "It's not an absolution I can grant you. What happened, happened. The choices were made. By your grandfather. By your father. By you." She looked out the window, at the setting sun casting long shadows across the lawn. "You have to live with your choices, Michael," she said. "That is the consequence. That is the penance. You have to live with them, just as I had to live with yours for so long." He stared at her, understanding dawning in his ruined eyes. He was looking for a bridge back to her, but she had already dismantled it, stone by stone. There was no way back. He stood up, placed the untouched glass of water on a side table, and walked to the door. He paused with his hand on the knob, his back to her. "Goodbye, Mom," he said. And then he was gone. Elizabeth stood in the living room for a long time, listening to the sound of his car driving away, until it faded into the quiet hum of the evening. The house was finally, completely hers. The liquidation was swift and brutal. On a Tuesday morning, Elizabeth sat at her kitchen table, a sheaf of legal documents spread before her, a sleek fountain pen in her hand. On the phone, on a secure line, was the lead trustee, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Maria Flores. "The final assets have been appraised, Ms. Vance," Maria's voice was crisp, "including the intellectual property rights to the Blackwood Sons name, which a competitor in Singapore is surprisingly eager to buy. The total comes to a significant sum." "Good," Elizabeth said. "The instructions stand. Every penny goes to the endowment." "The Vance Fund is officially chartered as of 9 a.m. this morning," Maria confirmed. "Its mission, as you stipulated, to provide scholarships, grants, and mentorship for women pursuing careers in architecture and engineering, ensuring their work is seen, credited, and celebrated." Elizabeth picked up the pen. The ink was a deep, rich black. She signed her name at the bottom of the founding charter. It was a simple act, but it felt more monumental than laying the cornerstone of any skyscraper. With a stroke of a pen, she was turning the ashes of the Blackwood legacy into the foundation of something new. Something that would build futures instead of just buildings. The next call was to the head of the city's Historical Preservation Society. They had been trying to acquire her house for years, recognizing it as a pristine example of mid-century residential design. Thomas's design, the world had always thought. "We can meet your price, Elizabeth," the director said, his voice warm with respect. "We will maintain it exactly as you and Thomas left it. It will become a museum, a teaching tool." "I have one condition," Elizabeth said, the plaque by the door. It will read, "The Vance House, designed by Elizabeth Vance, built by Thomas Vance." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Of course," the director said softly. "It would be our honor." She sold it for its full market value, every last dollar. The House of Memories, the Gilded Cage, was no longer her responsibility. Its story was now public, corrected and complete. 3 months later, the sun was rising over a different landscape, not over a manicured garden in a quiet suburb, but over the vast, churning expanse of the Pacific Ocean. Elizabeth stood on the balcony of a minimalist apartment, a space of clean lines, pale wood, and glass, perched on a cliff overlooking the Oregon coast. The air tasted of salt and freedom. She had designed it herself, every inch of it, from the way the morning light hit the kitchen island to the precise angle of the window in her studio, framing the sea and the sky. It was a house with no ghosts. Her phone, sitting on a small table, lit up with a soft glow. She picked it up. It was a message from Ava, who was now in her final year of law school, clerking for a public interest firm. The message read, "She got the email this morning. The first ever Vance Scholar. A brilliant young woman from a community college in Texas. She's going to MIT. She knows your story, Grandma." They all will. Elizabeth felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the rising sun. A legacy wasn't a name carved on a building. It was a door opened for someone else. She smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile. She walked back inside, into her studio. The room was sparse, containing only a drafting table, a chair, and a stack of fresh sketchbooks. The tools of her trade, reclaimed. She picked one up. The paper was crisp, a blank canvas of infinite possibility. She uncapped a pen. For the first time in her life, there was no client brief, no husband's vision to facilitate, no firm's style to emulate. There was only her own imagination, vast and deep as the ocean outside her window. She touched the pen to the page and began to draw. A line, fluid and confident. A curve, elegant and strong. She didn't know what it would become. A house, a bridge, a sculpture. It didn't matter. The sun broke fully over the horizon, flooding the room with golden light. Elizabeth Vance, architect of her own life, was drawing entirely for herself. She was free.